From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. Hello everyone, today we have a true pioneer in organic and biodynamic farming joining us, Jeff Poppen, better known as the Barefoot Farmer. Jeff recently published a book called Barefoot Biodynamics that you can find in our bookstore. He also was one of our speakers at our conference this past December, and you can find his recording in our EcoAg conference recordings. Find the link to that in our show notes. For over 50 years, Jeff has been farming the rich lands of Long Hungry Creek Farm in Tennessee, cultivating not just crops, but a deep understanding of soil, ecology, and community-supported agriculture. Through his work, he's inspired farmers, gardeners, and food lovers alike with his commitment to holistic, sustainable food production. Today, we're going to explore his journey into owning land and biodynamics, the philosophy behind his methods, and his blueprint on how to till properly. I think you will enjoy this conversation. So whether you're a seasoned farmer, an inspiring grower, or just passionate about real food, you won't want to miss this. Let's dig in.
So you probably heard of horn manure?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is horn manure. And,
So that's manure that's come out of a horn that was been buried for a year?
yeah. And it makes a colloidal substance. So what we're kind of looking for is no smell. They like it that when it smears like this.
Yeah, there's no smell.
It shows like fungal activity when it has this like smear.
It's like fluffy too.
Right, you can tell that it's a good humus product.
Yeah.
And then we're told to stir it in water for an hour and then sprinkle it on the land, which was sort of validated in the late 90s from Elaine Ingham's research into what she called composting.
Right.
So we're taking this and stirring it in warm water. We're sort of like bubbling composting. But there's a lot of different ways to look at these preparations. There's a biological way or a chemistry way. But some of the practitioners stress the energetics of it too, which is I don't necessarily believe or disbelieve, but it's certainly a hard sell.
Yeah, I think that's...
And so I feel like that biodynamics has been disserved by a lot of the lecturers. And my very best friend, Hugh Lovell and Hugh Courtney, are examples of people that lecture on it and turn the audience away from it.
Yeah.
Because they start bringing in spiritual concepts or what I refer to as woo-woo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I look upon Steiner's agricultural course as a response to the synthesis of nitrogen that happened 10 years earlier. And in the first lecture, he says, I can't find any potatoes that taste as good as the potatoes I had when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And the reason that he gave was the chemicals.
Yeah.
And so he's basically saying, quit using chemicals, go back to farming the way they did, your farmers, your parents farmed, which would have been late 19th century agriculture, which is what they teach in these books, which is why I've got hundreds of these and I study them. And I would rather read a 7th grade agricultural book than any of this shit.
Yeah.
Because these people are talking from experience and observation.
And
there's no theory.
And they're putting it into a form that is easily understood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these authors aren't trying to prove that they're smart. They're actually trying to teach kids how to observe nature and then how to copy what you've observed in your farm work.
I thought it was interesting. I talked to Dwayne a little bit. What's his last name?
Morgan.
Dwayne Morgan. He was one of the people at this conference that were one of the main speakers. And, the first thing he said to me is, well, if you don't have the biological side of your farm figured out, then none of this is going to work anyways.
That's right.
And I was like, well, that almost should be like the first thing people are told before anything else in the biodynamic world, because
Right.
I almost think, like when I went to that conference, it was like you could do all these things and it's like this magical solution that will fix anything. And it's like, well, Dwayne talked for how long, and the first thing he says to me is like, well, you got to make sure that you have the biological stuff fixed.
So I don't know if you probably didn't attend my lecture, but when I lectured at Acres, and what I'll do in Pennsylvania is I talk about old time farming for 30 minutes before I even mention this shit.
Yeah.
And I say, and so I agree 100% with what Dwayne on that we have to have crop rotations, cover crops, livestock rotations, composting, remineralization, learning how to friggin' plow. Most people don't even know how to plow, how to set a plow, and they don't understand the importance of lifting that soil up into the air. And these books and what I teach, 95 to 98% of a plant is made out of the things that come from the air. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and that stuff. And so we have to have this air be able to get in and out of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to loosen it up somehow. But you can certainly plow wrongly. And
so what is the lesson on how to plow? I know it's probably a lot longer than just a couple minutes.
Well, a couple of the lines that I use would you should plow like you're turning over a sleeping baby.
Yeah.
Slow,
gentle,
not ripping through it. It's third gear type of thing.
Yeah.
We should only use a mold board for turning a sod. The rest of the time use a chisel that doesn't invert it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use that tool right there, that section harrow.
Yep.
I use that a lot. And what that does is it checks evaporation. So once you get biological activity in your soil surface and you've deepened it up, then moisture soaks in, and by harrowing the surface, you check the evaporation. And we've grown crops for 40 years, but we never irrigate. We just utilize the moisture that's fell during this fall and winter and conserve it. And these old books have these great stories. This one story was they had a field that was composted heavily and a field that wasn't. And they grew corn in both fields. And then in the summertime, they dug a pit 4 feet deep in each field. And they measured the moisture content for each foot. And then the soil that had been composted, there was more moisture in the top.
Yeah.
But there was less moisture at 4 foot, proving that the moisture was actually wicking up. Mm-hmm. But whereas if you don't have the biological activity, that doesn't happen as well.
So is there when anyone asks me who has no introduction to biodynamics, and I'm naive to it myself, I explain it as kind of like a different form of doing biological amendments or composting. Right. Like when you bury a horn with cow manure, like something is happening in the soil with that, whether or not you believe in the energies or the process of it.
It does change.
Yeah. So how do you think the biodynamic world better? I think you do a great job at it as far as teaching these things in a way that people can kind of get introduced to it without being turned away from it. Mm-hmm. But I also notice in these groups, not just biodynamics, but all these little subsect groups that are in our world, they kind of they get territorial, where it's like, no, this is how we do it. Mm-hmm. And if you do things differently, then you're not really doing what we're doing.
Yeah. So that's a good question. The way I answer that is that I'll talk about the good farming practices, and then at some point I'll say, it's really beneficial to make compost, and when we're applying something to our fields, it should have no nitrates in it. Mm-hmm. It should be fully humified, and that's done through biological activity. So when you're preparing your land for a crop, put some sort of biological stimulant on it. I don't care I use this one, but I don't care if you use Korean natural farming or compost tea or rotted seaweeds or whatever it is, but just do something to stimulate the biological activity. This one is handy because it doesn't cost anything. You can make all these things on your farm with materials that are already on the farm. And so one of the main teachings in biodynamics, that was what my father told me when I bought a farm 50 years ago. You got a farm. You don't have to buy anything. And that's really the bottom line, is that profit is a subtraction of, what you sell something for what your inputs are. You keep your inputs low, you're going to make more profit.
Yeah.
And so a farm organism, in my opinion, should have cattle and cover crops and crops grown to feed the cattle. And 85% of what the farm grows then goes back to the farm in the form of crop residues and manures and things of this nature. And only 10 or 15% actually leaves the farm as the crop. And that 10 or 15%, like I was saying, is mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and the very little bit of mineral that are in it, calcium, other cations, and phosphorus and such, that's replenished by the oxygen and hydrogen that are go into the soil that are liberating that with the carbonic acid from the rocks, your parent soil materials. And as much as that can be released every year is how much you're able to sell without having to bring in outside inputs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think it does. That's kind of like the basic lesson of biological, ecological agriculture.
I read Charles Walter's book 50 years ago, and I've read all those Albrecht papers and all that stuff, and that seems to be what they're saying. To just keep what you sell off the land, just keep that to, what the land can regenerate itself.
Right. What's some of your background? How was your dad doing some of these practices, or how did you first get introduced to all this?
My dad was an organic gardener and a horticulturist. When I knew him anyway. The history would be he was born in 1906. So he grew up with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This third chapter of this says how to graft the fruit tree. Yeah. My dad said a boy could not go to school without a pocket knife. He said, that wasn't even allowed. So it was a different horse-drawn world. And so like Steiner too, grew up with peasants and stuff, but he did everything he could to get away from it. So Steiner went to the University of Vienna and got 3 doctorates, and my father ended up at Peabody University in Nashville and got a couple of doctorates in mathematics and psychology. My sister was born in Tennessee, and he moved to Northwestern University for a better job, it's a mathematical university. He was a statistician. And then he did 5 works or so as an industrial psychologist, helping groups of people figure out how to work better together. And then he chucked it all, put his overalls back on, and bought 40 acres outside of Chicago. He just didn't want to do that anymore. And one of the books, I imagine you carry it, that inspired him was Living the Good Life by the Nearings. And the idea that it's time to get intelligent people back into agriculture. Yeah. So he was, took cornfields like this and planted nursery stock, and was doing landscaping. And so at about 12, he had to sell the 40 acres because the suburbs had moved out of Chicago and had taken this little town over. And so he bought 300 acres in northern Indiana. And at this point, he was retired and leased the land out to local farmers who were farming the way that he didn't like. Mm-hmm. And he was very clear about that. And he did a little bit of organizing for the Farmers Union and tried to get an alfalfa mill in so that people could grow alfalfa as one of the crops. And, but there was, Earl Butz was in office, and it was a strong movement get bigger.
Yeah.
And plow fence row to fence row and get either. So really the main problem in agriculture is the separation of crop production and livestock.
Yeah.
So every farm needs to have both. It doesn't work. And I'm going to say here too, if you just keep running cattle all the time and never plow those fields and grow a crop once in a while, the land will degrade.
Yeah.
It does help to aerate it, grow a crop, and then put it back into the grass.
So what do you think about all the people that are preaching the no-till, never to plow? Do you think they can truly get the same type of aeration through their ground through using cover crops?
Well, I believe in no-till.
Yeah.
KNOW, till. So we have to use tillage as one of the tools in agriculture, just like cattle or a tractor or a plow. And so,
because I don't think we have anyone who's solidly put together a plan for true organic no-till.
right, I would agree with that. So what I say is no-till until you need to till, then till until you can no-till. Is that clear?
Yeah. What is your rules on the rotation? Like when you till a field, do you have a general rule of how long that field will be producing something before you till it again?
Well, different areas have different issues. So I live in hill country, not unlike this, but the tops of my fields are only about an acre before it slopes back off. And so I have put a deer fence around 5 of those acres. And because I put a deer fence up, I use those spots of land continuously for vegetable production.
Yeah.
And then I rotate cattle, make hay, make compost, use the compost on those fields because there's excess fertility from cattle and hay. And so that's how I was taught from my local old-time farmers, is that you really can't make a decent living growing cattle.
Yeah.
Because the markets are so fluctuating and are basically controlled by gamblers and Wall Street, and Chicago Board of Trade and all that. You know all that stuff, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So you take the excess fertility from the cattle, rot it for a few years, put it on an acre of ground, and you grow a tobacco crop. And that's where you sort of have a guaranteed cash income.
Yeah.
So that's the type of agriculture that I fell into, except my parents were dying from tobacco, and so I didn't want to grow tobacco. And so
I think most people who had experience with tobacco when they were younger didn't like it.
I was sort of lucky that I didn't. Oh, my generation had weed, so we just smoked that instead. My dad found out, and my mom got all upset and everything, and my dad was like, 1906, he was like, well, we used to go behind the barn and smoke weeds. And we lived in where they had the hemp, so the ditchweed grew. Yeah, we thought getting a headache was what the Beatles were talking about, getting high. We didn't know any better until, somebody brought something in.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's sort of beside the point. So I wanted to farm using all the same equipment that my neighbors farmed. Plows and harrows and manure spreaders and things of that nature. So I didn't buy into all the new plastic mulching or flail mowers and crimpers and all. That costs too much to make sense to a poor farmer in Appalachia.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to I have Farmall 140 tractors, have the engine offset. And I just make, I grow cover crops in the fall and mow them and put maybe 30 tons of compost per acre per year. And then I gently till it, and then I wait. And I just wait a week or so, and then biological activity changes in the soil because I've had a winter cover crop that, in the fall had buckwheat late fall was filled with daikons or turnips, and then in March or so it springs up with the red crimson clover. The crimson clover that has this bright red.
Yeah.
And so I get those 3 cover crops off of one sowing after a vegetable crop. And then I mow the field, usually a couple times, crossways, pretty close to the ground, with a bush hog. Don't have anything fancy. And then I run the chisel through it. And then what's happened is that the microbiology that lives on the cover crops during the winter gets a little bit shaken up when there's no more root exudates coming because you've mowed the plant. And then it gets further shaken up when you chisel it a little bit. So then by not doing anything, stuff is doing.
Yeah.
And so I let the biological activity shift from winter microbial activity to what's going to be the summer microbial activity.
What are you looking for in that week or 2 weeks? You looking for the first emergence of something?
No, I'm just, everything I've learned, Taylor, has been through making stupid mistakes.
Yeah.
So I would chisel the field 4 times in the course of a morning or something, and then try to plant that day, and then I'd get the soil real fine. Then it would rain and turn to concrete.
Yeah.
And then after 20 or so years of doing that, I learned more about tillage and being gentler and just waiting. And so when I chisel it right after each other, it never really breaks apart. It just gets smaller and smaller, but there's still these clumps of roots hanging on. If I wait a week and then I chisel it, everything busts apart because it's had time to die and the microbes aren't holding on and the soil just busts off the roots.
So you will chisel, wait a week, and then chisel again?
Yeah, chisel one way, then maybe chisel another way.
Yeah.
And then I'll wait another week. And this, everything I say is a lie, because I'm using words. It might be 4 or 5 days, it might be 10 days. It depends on the weather, and so you have to know the moisture content. The soil has to squeeze it and fall from your hand and bust apart. If it doesn't, you can't do anything. You just have to wait. You might have to wait a month, if you get a month of rain. So it's all based on what's happening. But usually the 3rd time I can go through and I pull the section harrow behind the chisel. And the ground's still pretty rough looking, but that's what I make rows in the plant. So then I take the farm tractor with the cultivators. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So we got middle busters behind the tires. So I just go put the back middle busters down and I go through the field and make 2 rows. And then I turn the tractor around, put 1 tire in that row and go back, and now I have 3 rows. And I go through the whole field that way. So I've lined everything up using the middle busters behind the tires. So when you fluff up soil and then you plant seeds in it, and they're not going to sprout very good because the soil's fluffed up. You actually have to have firm seed to soil contact. So for years I didn't like that the tire was packing the soil, and I tried to make rows other ways. But then I understand now that actually some compaction right where your plant is a good idea because it helps that flow of moisture that comes up if you're doing dryland farming. So we always try to plant before dry weather. And then we sow the seed.
Yeah, that was interesting when you told me that before, because usually your thought would be, I want to plant right before a rain.
Yeah, I did that for 30 years, pretty stupid. Yeah, so what you do is you get the soil in good heart, you make your rows, we plant the seeds, or seed potatoes or whatever it is, and then we step on it. We're walking down the row, planting and walking behind with our feet. And then I take the cultivators through and put dry soil on top. And so hopefully it doesn't rain for, a week. This crop can come up and you can get a cultivation in before it's rained, and you got a crop.
Yeah.
Because you're ahead of the weeds. So I like to say things like the crop is grown before the field is sown. It's the field preparation that makes your crop, not what happens at the seeding afterwards. And so people come to a farm like mine, young kids and stuff, and I want to plant. That's what they come to a farm to plant. Well, planting is like maybe 2% of my labor.
Yeah, a very short period of time.
It's like a couple hours we got the field seeded, and they're But I'm not doing the organic farming method of hoop houses, raising plants in little trays, laying plastic and drip irrigation down and putting plants in there. So that's kind of the modern organic style. So this is sort of an older time way of doing things.
How'd you get from the 300 acres in Indiana to where you are now? Because I'm sure you guys had a chance to...
Yeah, so we could have stayed there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And my childhood sweetheart's dad had 250 acres right nearby.
Oh.
So we actually were 80 miles from Chicago with, probably 400 acres of the best soil in the world. And we choose to move to the worst soil in the world. And why we did it was simply, it was economically unfeasible to buy land up there. And Dad would have given us land. The way we got there specifically was my older brother came home from California in the late 60s with a truckload of hippies, and we had a commune on Dad's farm in the back of the forest there, which, and they had, I was still 16 years old that era. So it was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I bet.
But it became apparent by the time I was 17, 18, John had went to Tennessee, basically just because the land was like 5% the price of land. We looked at some farms up in Indiana and could buy something. And I think there's that, for me, anyway, there was a desire to get away from mom and dad and do my own thing.
Right.
So we bought land down there. Dad's stories of Tennessee were always, 400 miles south, so the climate was milder. Chicago's, well, I'm sure up here, windy and cold.
Yeah.
And so, and then the cheapness of everything down there was, nice. And then the people are extremely friendly, and my father been going there mostly in the 30s and 40s. Like, you can drive through the countryside in your Model T without people coming out their porches and gawking at you and stop, come here, have lunch with us, because there just wasn't a lot of people around.
Right.
And that's the nature of the Southern people, is to be real hospitable, or else shoot you with the shotgun, one.
Yeah. One or the other.
Yeah, not much in between.
So what type of farm how did you identify the farm that you landed on as something that you wanted, just because it was available?
Well, John had bought it without me looking at it.
Okay.
So I went down and...
So you're on the same place that he bought originally?
Yeah, well, just about. So we got 100 acres for $16,000, and and it was very pretty, beautiful.
Yeah.
But not very practical. Forests and hills and stuff, creeks. So a couple of years later, my father came down and said, well, I'm sending your younger brother to Indiana University. It's going to cost $8,000 for 4 years. And we'll send you to university if you want. And I said, I didn't think I wanted to go. And he said, well, if you had $8,000, what would you do with it? And I said, I'd pay off John's farm. And he said, okay. So he got me started with basically my college education. He knew intuitively that would be better to happen on a farm than at college.
Yeah.
Basically, I was going to major in sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So I got myself a girl. I could grow weed, and I learned how to play guitar.
That's all you need.
Yeah. So I identified it as organic after I'd been there for a while. I was using manures and compost, and I didn't use chemicals, and so people started calling me an organic farmer. at this point now, I'm probably still getting Organic Gardening and Farming magazine, but it wasn't fulfilling the need. And then Acres was the next magazine, you know, kind of way that I started looking at things, which is kind of taking Rodale's ideas, which were really mostly for gardeners, and then upping it more for farmers.
Right.
And so I bought a bunch of those books and read that stuff. But my father had a collection of books that Mom had bought him. One of the things that came from California to Indiana was the Whole Earth Catalog. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I have.
So it was just a collection of topics with resources for those topics. Yeah, just various things, but organic gardening was one of them. And the 4 books were Agriculture by Rudolf Steiner, Bees by Rudolf Steiner, Companion Planting, and Weeds and What They Tell.
Yeah.
I think you've carried all those books over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, we're ordering more of them right now.
Yeah, so
they're still popular. Hey, Eco Farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres USA. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres USA membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres USA magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres USA, but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes.
Yeah, so that was my introduction into just biodynamics. And so I had a lot of conversations with my dad about this stuff, and he recognized the importance of having livestock on the farms and not using chemicals and stuff. And he didn't buy into the spiritual aspect particularly. So, yeah, by the mid-'80s, I was trying to learn how to make these preparations and ran across a few mentors. Hugh Lovell kind of began as a mentor, but we ended up kind of just being buddies. And then Hugh Courtney was the fellow that helped us learn how to make these. And then the other fellow was a big Acres fan, and his name was Harvey Lyle.
Yep.
And so my father and I went and visited Harvey in 1987. And Harvey had 3 daughters, and he was younger than my father, but could relate, similar generation. And then my father died within a year, and Harvey adopted me. And basically would come down to visit me every couple times a year or something. And he was big into the energetics of this stuff. And the way that he would measure it was through something called dowsing. And it turns out that Hugh Courtney and Hugh Lovell would use that method. I never felt comfortable with it myself, and so I don't use that method.
What is it?
Dowsing is like when you take sticks and like a fork stick and look for water.
Yeah.
That's what, so what these guys would look for energies.
Mm-hmm.
So in dowsing, you clear your mind, what I guess I couldn't do, and then you just think about good spring water, good potable water, in good quantity. And then you walk around your farm with a stick, and then at some point the stick goes down. You're familiar with dowsing, right?
Yeah, I've actually done the finding water lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's how that works. If I understood it, I would probably be into it more, but it's just, I don't know how it works.
Well, the water line thing is like there's a water line 6 feet down into the ground. You walk around with the two, and then all of a sudden they move forward.
How does that work? Anyway.
Obviously, it's something to do with the water energy of.
Yeah, but it has also something to do with your head.
Yeah. Well, you think so?
Well, you're thinking that.
You're hoping that it shows you.
If you walk around and don't think about water, you can cross over the water and it won't do it.
Yeah.
You actually, there's something, you have to be saying to yourself. So anyway, these guys would say, what is the energy? So they would make a compost pile, and the energy of a compost pile would radiate out 50, 60 feet. But then they would put these preparations in it, and it would radiate out farther. Mm-hmm. And that's how kind of they were.
So one of the questions I think people were struggling at this conference with is why do you stir in biodynamics? So is that something that you?
Yeah, I would address that as we're making a homeopathic medicine for the farm.
Yeah.
So we're using very small amounts of these preparations, like for example, this would be dandelion flowers that we've buried in the mesentery and we've rotted and made a humus product out of. And according to Steiner, this dandelion plant with its taproot and conspicuous flower and seed heads has a relationship with the elements of potassium and silica, and helps to and get the compost pile to free up those elements from their locked up states into a state that can
That's essentially just, it's like what everyone talks about, is like making these minerals and available.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So so then these all go into a compost pile. So
all of them together?
Well, we put them in separate holes in the compost pile.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So there's 6 of those. And then there's 2, the silica and the horn silica and horn manure, that we stir for an hour. And so we've taken manure, cow manure, which throughout history has been regarded as the best fertilizer. And the reason it is, and this is, I like to say it's wisdom from the Vedas of India and the Bible of Judaic literature. They talk in there a lot about cows and sheep and goats, but they don't talk about horses. And so the reason is that the cow, the ruminants, cloven hoof, chew cud, are capable of making the land more fertile than it was beforehand. And they do this because of the digestive tracts. So a cow can live off of 2 acres, a 1,000-pound cow. But if the manure is properly handled and the urine, it can make 4 acres fertile. So it can re-fertilize the 2 acres that it needed, plus there's extra fertility. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the basis of agriculture, of non-input agriculture. So what I teach is nitrogen is an agricultural product.
Yeah.
It's not an agricultural input. And so we have got to figure out how to get nitrogen on our crops. And we have to do it without using anything that has nitrates in it. And so we want to go back to the way people farmed before 1914 and the synthesis of nitrogen, when all farms had livestock and legume cover crops. And so that's how we reinvigorate the soil with nitrogen.
What was Steiner's background? How did he come up with all of these?
Yeah, so Steiner was a peasant in Lower Austria, lived up out in the forests and would wander around these forests as a child and ran into herbalists and peasants that had intuitive knowledge. And then when he was after what we would call high school. Of course, they had different names for it. He went to Vienna to get his doctorates, and he rose to the top of the bunch of kids there as being this brilliant intellectual fellow. And he took his 3 degrees, which were in math, but also biology and chemistry. So Rudolf Steiner in the late 19th century was really one of the first biochemistry students. And so this is an era when a few people had access to microscopes and were learning about biology in the soil, and the chemistry mixed, not just biology, not just chemistry. So he went to Weimar, Germany, to archive the scientific work of Goethe. So Johann Wolfgang Goethe was Germany's greatest poet. He was the fellow that wrote Faust, and was a Renaissance man 100 years before Steiner. And are you familiar with his work at all?
I've heard the name, I'm not familiar with the work.
So, just great poet. He was regarded as the world's first rock star. He wrote a booklet smaller than these books called The Sorrows of Young Werther, which is a love story. Sold 50 million copies or something, huge, that nobody had ever done before. And people all throughout Europe were wearing the clothes that, were on that in the book. And he became this real popular guy at 24 years old. And he would go into a pub and there'd be people interacting. And within minutes, he would take someone like Weston and write a poem about him and epitomize him. And he was just really good at reading people and writing poetry and songs. And so he was extremely popular. And when he was, fast forward 10 years, he's in his late 30s, and he's tired of fame. I compare it to like Bob Dylan in '68 when he just disappeared. Mm-hmm. He's just tired of it. He wanted to go have a family and live a peaceful, quiet life for a minute anyway. So he, in disguise, left Germany, didn't tell anybody what he was doing, and went to Italy. And walked the streets of Rome, and learned about art. He was an artist too. But he also had an interest in how plants grow and the forming of animals and plants. And this led to scientific studies of Goethe. So I'll just give you an example. Goethe studied painting. Well, Newton, who had come 100 years before, was a champion of deduction and reductive science at that time. And what induction is where or deduction is where you have a general principle, and then you do experiments and observations that relate to that general principle or law. And so Newton proposed that if you shine light through a prism, it breaks apart into these 8 colors in the spectrum. And so, and they're the colors of the rainbow, and they're in a certain order. Fairly sure you're familiar with them, but we go from a green in the middle. On one side it would be yellows and oranges and reds, and on the other side it would be blues, purples, and indigo. Mm-hmm. And so, and this was generally accepted theories to this day, that there's these 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And art is sort of based on that. Well, Goethe tried that experiment. He took a prism and shone light through it onto a blank wall, and there's nothing happens. And so he's scratching his head, and then he realized that where there was a dark wall next to it, that's where the light, the colors show up. It has to be the juxtaposition of light and dark for colors to appear. And they always appear in a certain order. On the light side, you'll get the blues, purples, and indigos, and on the other side, you'll get the green in the middle, and you'll get the yellows, oranges, and reds. And so he wrote a book called The Theory of Color. And in it, he says, I take issue with Newton. I think there's only two primary colors. There's the ones that go from blue, darker, and there's the ones that go from yellow, darker. And so he said these two primary colors then are epitomized by blue sky, which is the darkness of space shining through the lit atmosphere, and then there's this yellow sun, which is light shining through darkness. And so you have yellow and blue, and these were the primary colors. And so he wrote this book about it. And then towards the end of the book, he says, well, and by the way, when I look at red, I get intense. And when I look at blue, I get calm. And sort of how the colors made him feel emotionally. Mm-hmm. Well, you can imagine this scientific work did not go over big with scientists. And everybody's like, go back to writing poetry. So,
that's an old marketing ploy now, putting certain colors on to make people feel a certain way to...
Oh, it's well accepted now, but it wasn't then because we were really trying hard from the Renaissance time onward to not go with intuitions and imaginations, but actually it had to be scientifically proven.
Yeah.
So that was his whole thing, and Goethe was just one of the few people that kind of stood up and said, well, that's good and fine for the material mechanical world. So when you were studying inorganic science, Newton's laws work. They are responsible for all the machineries and all the inventions that we have. But when it comes to studying the organic world, Goethe suggested that we use a different method. And this would be called induction. So in mathematics of that time, which my father collected old mathematic books besides old farming books, and you'll find the definition of induction as being sort of the opposite of deduction, and that is where you just make a bunch of observations. And this is what people would have done before books and all this stuff. You're just living in nature, trying to make eat something, whatever, and you just observe natures, and after observing natures for years and years, general principles. So induction is, they arise. Mm-hmm. Induction is repeated observations that lead to the general principle, rather than starting with the general principle and then taking observations to try to relate it to the general principle. So Goethe wrote a book, The Metamorphosis of the Plant, and it sort of talked just paragraph by paragraph how the seed sprouts and grows into unfolds into a plant and makes seeds. And for this annual plant then he was interested not in what Linnaeus was doing, which was dividing all the plants into the different species and stuff, which Goethe was interested in that, but he also was looking for the archetypical plant. What do these plants have in common? Mm-hmm. What is the general principle guiding plant growth? And so that's what he was looking for, was the commonality of growth. And then he did the same thing with animals, and there's a bone in the human being that hadn't been discovered yet, the intra-maximilian bone in the neck. And through morphology and the study of growth, nothing in the organic world is static. It's always changing. Mm-hmm. It's always growing. It's just that it's growing so slowly we don't you look at that tree and it looks like it's not growing. But things are happening in that tree all the time.
Right.
And so he was looking at the changes that happened as a plant was growing, or the changes that happen as evolution proceeds from one, developing more complicated species. And he predicted the discovery of this bone, which was then later discovered.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so what he was doing was just kind of studying the changes in plants and animals rather than taking it from its natural environment into the scientist's laboratory and tearing it apart and studying it. And so his Goetheanistic science then is known as an observational science, where we just observe things and then just keep observing them until something we get an intuition to what's going on.
So Steiner picked up on his teachings.
So Steiner picked up on that he was given the task of editing these scientific works. 100 years ago, people just, after Goethe died, they hid it.
Yeah.
They don't want, because he was a great poet and a great, fiction writer and all that kind of stuff. So he kind of revived that. And his doctorate, I believe, was in Goethe scientific studies. And then one of the things that Goethe was noticing is that in Newtonian science, if you're looking for something that's, you have your general principle and you're looking for it, you'll find it. So the principle that was expounded by Goethe and Steiner was, you're going to find what you look for. If you don't look for it, you're not going to find it.
Yeah.
And so this was later proven with the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, where if you look for a particle, it's a particle. If you look for a wave, it's a wave. But the more you look at it, the more it changes. So the observer affects the observation. So this was radical in 1937 when Heisenberg came up with it, but it's extremely radical, in the late 1890s.
So how do you put that into observing agriculture right now? So for farmers observing their land, I mean, it's one of the most important things.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that they are looking for something, or do you recommend that their mind is clear and they're just open to whatever they observe?
The latter.
Yeah.
And
because the idea of if you're looking for a certain thing, it skew the way that you view what happens.
Right.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kemp, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kemp, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show.
So you may study Kinsey agricultural soil tests and look for those kinds of things and correct them, and you will have better crops.
Mm-hmm.
You can also observe how things work in nature and notice that good crops grow where there's really good humus soil. And then we can create humus soils with composting and cover cropping. And then maybe we release those same minerals from parent rock materials that a Kinsey report might tell you to put on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be one way of just using your observation skills. Now, mind you, I put lime on my fields, and I like to know whether it's domitic lime or high calcium lime. I need, the latter. I put every 20 years or so, I buy a semi-truckload of rock phosphate and put on my land. I know that our lands are, that phosphorus is a limiting factor for what I want to do. Sprinkle wood ashes from the stove and burn a bonfire, maybe take the ashes and sprinkle it on the pastures. There's not too many beer cans in it.
So how would all these things then, how did you end up sifting through all this material, coming up with your version at your farm?
Well, I had a couple of advantages. One is I'm not college educated, and the other one is that I've always been very poor. And I would say I chose both of those on purpose, though I might not have known it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go to college because nature was way more interesting. And I just wanted to learn from that way. And there was a movement, and I guess you would call it the counterculture in the 60s, of sort of anti-materialism, or getting away from the things that money could buy and putting your effort into building relationships with human beings and such as that. And so it was, I wouldn't say volunteer poverty, but maybe volunteer simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And we were developing a self-sufficient homestead, trying to grow our own food and have milk cows and pigs and just chickens and move things around in an effort to grow our own food. And then when we grew extra, selling it for cash so we could buy stuff. But I just never wanted to make money through like usury, or having money in a bank and getting interest out of it, or buying something and then selling it for more than I paid for it. It seemed like whenever money is made in some sort of stock market or those kinds of methods of making money, it just seems to me, and I can't tell you why, but it seems that somewhere down the line somebody's going to be suffering. Mm-hmm. And maybe somebody in Africa that does the mining or whatever. But I just wanted to have the money that I was using to live on be something that I grew on the farm. And so because of that, I became a way better farmer. And I think I became a way better farmer because I moved away from some of the best farmland in the world to some of the worst. And our soils were 1 million years old and, hadn't had a glacier in a long, long time. And so if I didn't have cattle and brought the manure and put it on the fields, I couldn't grow anything. The soil was heavy and, it didn't work. So I had to slowly figure out how to loosen that soil up. The lime was one way, learning how to plow. My dad knew how to plow, and so I'd learned stuff from him, but mostly just from the neighbors around me and watching the way they were doing things. They didn't have any money either, and so they were just trying to eke out beating the clay to eke out a living, and so that's how I learned.
What's some of your base cattle? I guess observations. What do you look for in the cattle that you have on your farm?
Well, I like to say that I bought this farm as a kid. My dad came to visit and said, "Well, you got 50 acres of grass. You're gonna have to get some cattle." And I was like, "Well, I don't want cattle. I want to grow vegetables." And he said, "What's going to eat all the grass on your farm? What, are you going to just mow it and let it sit? What are you going to do?" So I got cows, and they kept getting out of the fences.
Well, yeah. What type of fences do you have then?
Really bad. They were like 2-strand barbed wire.
Yeah.
The farms that I inherited were poor Appalachian farms. Those people didn't have tractors.
Yeah.
They didn't have any money. They didn't fertilize much or anything. So they were pretty worn down farms. And so I dutifully put, I spent several years chasing cattle back into fences before I realized they were teaching me rotational grazing.
Yeah.
I had no clue about that. And so what we realized is if we kept them off some of the land and then moved them there later, that the cows were happier.
Right.
Better for the land and kind of stuff. Well, then along comes, I started writing books, and then another guy, Joel Salton, he was writing little pamphlets. Both of us started off writing pamphlets in the 90s. And, so I learned from people like him that were the importance of not necessarily rotational grazing for the animals, but rotational grazing for the rest period in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then Alan Savory's work was really clear about what we were doing here. It's the rest period is the important thing. Yeah. And so, known about this for a long time. You asked me, what am I looking for in the cattle? Well, I'm looking for them to be happy enough to not get out of the fences.
What type of cattle do you have?
They're Angus.
Yeah.
So, again, huge learning curve. Started out with the milk cows. They had babies. So a lot of my stock over 50 years has dairy stock in it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really until maybe 20 years ago. I got my bull 25 years ago. I got a brown Swiss bull, dual purpose. I was still under the illusion that human beings were want to go move back to the land and, want a homestead and take care of themselves. So I thought that raising animals that were beef and milk produced, dual purpose cows were a good idea. Oh, my calves were the long-legged, the worst kind for grass-fed beef.
Yep.
They looked like deer.
Yeah.
And so I eventually got short-legged, smaller, rounder bulls that brought my herd down to more of a grass, more like your cattle.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking for now is an animal that does well in grass.
What do you do? Because you mentioned, even in our place that we should turn the soil over in these different, I call them our perennial pastures. What do you do at your place for those areas that you're not growing vegetables on? But
that's a good question. Like your land, but maybe it's too steep to plow.
Yeah, we're fortunate here where we don't have the steepest of areas.
I haven't ever moldboard plow flipped the soil over. I saw it happen one time. It was in 1974, and a huge rain came over these fields. I didn't own the farm at the time, but it was a farm that I bought 20 years later. But oh my God, the gullies, Taylor, it was horrible.
I've seen them around here.
Yeah, it's just like, and so I never wanted to plow.
Yeah.
And then when I bought one of my farms, a 90-year-old man came over and told me, and there was this very steep land, about like that, growed up in cedar trees. Man, cedar trees were already that big. And he said, as a kid, we would plow that field. I mean, what do you mean field? That's a forest. He said, no, that was a field. And we'd get the mule up on top of the hill with the plow, and we would go straight down to the branch. And then the mule would drag the plow back up the hill, and we'd go straight down to the branch. And then we'd plant corn, and rain would come, and the branch just filled up knee-deep in mud. And we raised corn about that big. Fed it to the pigs, made moonshine, and ate cornbread. Next year, same thing. And they just totally plowed straight up and down. Before the soil conservation stuff in the 30s, they didn't know to plow this way.
Yeah.
That's like, it seems like, how could they not know that? But it was just easier.
Yeah, I could see why it'd be easier. I mean, think about trying to go side hill on something like that.
Right, yeah.
It's just not meant to be plowed.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
So what do? I take every other shank off of a chisel plow so that they're 2 feet wide, and then I'll just rip a field along the contour.
Yeah. And then what do you seed in there or sow in?
When it rains, then after a few days after rain, where the little trench is, I only go so far, 3-4 inches at most. There's mud in there, and I'm seeing moisture that would have ran off into the creek.
Yeah.
And so one of the tenants of Savory AP yeomans and stuff, is if water falls in your farm, you want it to stay there and go through plants and transpire and go back into the atmosphere that way. You can't really afford to let water fall on your land, go into a creek, and go down to the Mississippi.
Yeah.
So we want to contour.
Do you have terraces set up then?
There was terraces set up there in the 30s.
Oh.
And what I'm making, you could call mini terraces.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an issue where I live at. We have a lot of broom sedge and plants that grow in low lime, hard compacted soils.
Yeah.
And so it's an effort to get clovers and things to grow in it.
How have you seen your place transform then compared to the neighbors around you?
Well, their places oftentimes look better because they're using fertilizers and greening things up. But over the course of years, drought will come. And one of my neighbors came over one time and said, "Your grass looks so good. What did you do?" And I said, "I didn't use nitrate fertilizers." And they said, "You know what? The nitrate fertilizers really work well if it rains, but if it doesn't rain,
Burns it up.
Yeah, it looks terrible." And so I'm like, "Yeah, well, you can put that on there, and in a wet year, you'll make more bales of hay than I do, but I don't know about the quality." Dwayne had an interesting story. He's like me. He raises pretty poor quality hay.
Yeah.
And he took cows got out, and it was a cow that he kept getting out. And a neighbor got it up in the barn and said, "Come over and get your damn cow." And Dwayne was like, "I don't want that cow." Buy it from me. He said, "No, I don't want it either." "I'll tell you what, if you just keep it there until Saturday, we'll take it to the stock barn." And the neighbor said, "Okay." So Dwayne took over a bale of his shitty hay to feed this animal. He noticed while he was in the barn that the neighbor had some really good looking hay, and he was like, so he had already put down his hay, but he went and got some of the neighbor's hay, threw in there too, just feeling sorry for the animal. And he came back the next day and all of his hay was eaten and the neighbor's hay wasn't. He said all week long, that fresh, green, beautiful looking hay sat in that stall while the cow ate the non-nitrate hay.
They know a thing or two.
Yeah, I sort of think that cows are smarter than humans as far as what a cow needs.
Yeah, it is amazing to watch them go select. That's why I put out multiple bales at a time just to see which ones they pick.
Right,
first.
yeah, exactly.
It's interesting to see. Yeah.
And do you feel like the bale grazing is better unrolled or rolled, or leaving it rolled?
Well, obviously, on stuff that we consider the perennial pastures, we try to unroll everything on there. But then it's, the laziness, I guess. It's easier to just throw it out a week worth of hay out there and they're not going to be a problem. On the cover crops too, part of our idea with that is we want it a little bit thicker on there so that either we can drill into it and maybe it suppresses some of the weeds and use a little bit of mulch. Yeah. Or then the pigs come through and we'll stir it up and we seed into it.
Right. So Weston was saying that most of your reseeding is done following pigs. Right?
I wouldn't say most of it, but it's something that we're testing. Like the field that they're in right now, that was all done by pigs, and then the field right across the lane from them, we actually came through and tilled and then seeded.
So you're kind of watching.
And it was a 6-week difference from when that side was seeded and then this side was done in stages as the pigs moved through.
Of course.
And then this side, as the summer approached, it was like, oh well, it was growing uneven and it was losing on this side. But by the end of the summer, all of that stuff had gotten up to the same exact level that the stuff we planted 6 weeks earlier. I was like, well, I could have had a whole other rotation with cattle in there. I don't know what I was, but it was, there was also there were some different plants in the cover crop mix that were expressing themselves in the stuff we planted early too. Yeah. We had a kale plant that stood 7 feet tall. Wow. Obviously that came from the time that it spent in there and being able to grow
and it
up.
Probably was near a
cow pie
or something.
Where a bigger area of hay was.
Right.
But it was interesting to see, I was able to accomplish especially when you look at sorghum is the main thing you see out there. And I think that's a lot of what they're eating right now.
Right.
but we were able to accomplish the same exact thing, planting 6 weeks later, letting pigs get a crop off, and then just throwing seed in a day before they moved and let them do the planting instead of getting on a tractor.
Are you using that sorghum Sudan grass?
Yeah. Yeah, I like it a lot because, I mean, I could bite into it right now and it still has some juices coming out of it.
Yeah, I'm just starting to use that.
I think it's amazing because you can, people will bale it. We don't bale anything here, but you could bale it and get regrowth a couple times a year.
Sweet.
You can graze it and get regrowth a couple times a year. You graze it while it's, really growing and they gain a lot on it, or you graze it when it's stockpiled in the winter and they do well on it.
Cool. Yeah, it's a good plant.
Yeah. So, you have 3 different books. You want to go over, do you have a volume 1 of this one? Okay, gotcha. So, what made you start writing books besides just, obviously you read a lot of books?
Right, so 20 years into my solo agricultural career, after I left my father's farm, I was an organic farmer with selling maybe off of a few acres of vegetables. And a friend of mine started a newspaper in Red Boiling Springs, a little town of 600 people where I lived. And he asked me to write an article, start a newspaper column. And I was like, well, I'm a high school dropout, I don't know how to write, And I was like, well, I can't write. Well, he kept pestering me to write an article. He wanted to have, he saw stuff in me that I didn't see. And then after a few months, he said, Jeff, I'll give you $10 if you write me an article. And I had one there the next day. So unlike most writers, I've gotten paid for almost everything I've written. And after a few years, I put 40 of these articles together in a little booklet. After a few months of writing my articles, I called it my column Small Farm Journal. And I was just writing stories about what I did each week. Mm-hmm. Me and my editor, Jim, had discussed this idea of writing. And he said, just write what you just did. And I would come in and write about planting beans. And I would say I put a lot of compost on a row. And he would say, well, how much compost did you put? So he taught me to be more specific. Don't ever say lots of something. Just say 5 bushels or, try to write specifically. Don't use the same word in the same paragraph. Don't ever use an exclamation point. Just say something exciting. Mm-hmm. Let the reader get the exclamation point in there. And so I just learned a few basic things from him. And then he said, I came in one day with my article, and he said, look, your writing is good, but the title isn't very good. I'm going to rename it. I'm like, holy moly. What do you want to call it? He said, Barefoot Farmer. And I was like, nah. He said, no, that's what we're going to call it. And so he named this, and it stuck. So I'm writing these weekly articles, and I put 40 of them together in a little booklet, and we just peddled them around and sold a bunch of them. Did that for 3 years in a row, and then started having interns on the farm, and well, of course, all the 20-year-olds were way more educated, than I was. They could use computers and knew how to. I don't even know how to type. So everything I've written all my life has been handwritten. And so Corey said, let's put these together and try to make a book. So this came out probably 2001 as a collection of these articles. And then
I will say I like this one, the cover of this one the best.
Right. So this is in its maybe second printing. I bought, self-published them. Had to get 1,500 of them
printed to make it make sense.
Right. And then I'm on my second 1,500 of those.
Yeah.
About halfway through that. And so I did another book in 2011 of the last the next 10 years of articles. And for a cover, I did a picture very similar to this, in similar colors. You couldn't hardly tell the two books apart.
Yeah.
And so when it came time for the second printing, by then the photographer friend said, let's put a picture on there, because this is just a picture I took out my front door. Whereas he took hundreds of pictures before he found, this picture, and and then I think maybe one of the interns took that picture.
Well, that almost looks like that looks like a granite ridge, but this looks like a bottom.
Yeah, so our farm is part bottomland and part ridgeland.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so through the course of my 40 years of stupid mistakes, I realized that some things grow better in the bottom, and then other things want the full sun that you can get on a hilltop.
What do you have growing in between these rows?
Oh, probably weeds.
Weeds?
Yeah.
Living, you mean a living...
Right, I don't mind calling a spade a spade. So, so these would be articles in the early 2000s. Yep. And then I had been studying this agricultural course of Rudolf Steiner's. At this point, probably 30 years of reading it and rereading it and getting with Hugh Lovell and reading it, and Hugh Courtney and Harvey Lyle and other biodynamic people. And whenever we would have our conferences, we would always take some time off and read some of this book, which was kind of the basis of biodynamics. And I always felt like, get to the horse's mouth type of thing,
Yeah.
But have you ever looked at the book? I mean, it's impossible to read. It's using this terminology that Rudolf Steiner had developed to describe sort of esoteric things. And
yeah, I've seen it. I rely on people like you to translate it.
Right, so it became my calling at that time, I felt, was to try to rewrite the agricultural course in everyday language. And this took a long time for me to figure out. So I would take the agricultural course with me on vacations or wherever I was during the winter, and I would just write the sentences, that Steiner wrote, and then I would try to kind of rewrite them where I could get the same gist of what he was saying in a way that I felt was readable to someone like an 8th grade education, which was writing my first books.
Yeah.
And that sort of, not really dumbed down, but just not using 4-syllable words and giant long paragraphs and things, but just to write simply so that people can understand it. So I did this for a long time and got several people encouraging me, one of whom was Gene Gogoli from Steiner Press. I would go to a biodynamic conference and he would be pestering me, have you got that book done yet? Steiner Press really wants to, put your book out. But I wasn't ready. And so then Hugh Lovell stepped to the plate the year before he died and said, that is a great project. Let's get that done. I'll help you edit it. And so he took what I had written, a little self-published booklet called Agriculture Abridged, and we just, actually he had helped me do that. He took the writings that I'd had and we passed it back and forth. And he was a scientist, so I can talk about nitrogen and carbon, and I'll say, nitrogen's atomic number 6 and carbon's atomic number 7. And, I did a TV show like that one time.
Yeah.
It's backwards, stupid. And so Hugh Lovell helped me get the chemistry right, which I'm not a chemist.
Yeah.
And so to have, and he had read this agriculture course many, many times, was a biodynamic farmer too. And at this point was a consultant. So we got this booklet together and I published it. He had already died. And then Steiner Press, Gene Gogolsky had died. Go to Acres, Ryan wasn't there anymore. And so I was like, I'll just self-publish it. And lo and behold, Chelsea Green got a copy of it. And I had spent the whole process of trying to take my personality out of this work. And these books are very personable.
Yeah.
Stories. And so I wanted to write a textbook.
Yeah.
There's no personality in the textbook. So, and so that's what Hugh and I came up with, was a sort of a textbook. And Chelsea Green gets a hold of it and says, well, there's no personal stories in it. I did that on purpose. No. So
Yeah.
this book here then has the agricultural simplified within it. And then another pamphlet that I had wrote was, I called it What Farmers Do, but it's just basic agriculture, again, written for a grade school, along the lines of these books that I study. So this is an old textbook for grade school kids about principles of agriculture, 1904.
Have you seen this one before?
No, I just happened in a bookstore, and
Yeah, you just picked.
but I'll buy anything if it's an agricultural textbook before 1914 and synthesis of nitrogen. Yeah. So anyway, so the first half of this book are just stories of some of the guiding principles that Rudolf Steiner gave. He didn't teach farming. And halfway through the book, he says, needless to say, you'll have to go on manuring as before, referring to the way people fertilize their land before the chemicals came around. And so, then I took a few of these guiding lines. I just picked out some. Any biodynamic farmer would have picked out different guiding lines to follow. Some people go more into planting by the signs, for example. I don't really do that, so I didn't really go into that. I know about it, but I'm more into the sort of the social aspects of farming. Who should be talking about farming?
Yeah.
It should be people that are farmers. It shouldn't be economists telling us what farm prices should be or how the social structures of the farm should be set up. And so that was one of the guiding lines. Another one was that we should have celebrations on our farms and festivals and bring a bit of joy into the farming thing, the community aspects. Farming, you can have a farm by yourself and raise all your food and eat it, but you probably healthier if you grow some things and your neighbor grows some things, and then you interact, and then it develops a social network.
Yeah.
And then just, how nitrogen works and various things like that I thought were real important.
Are these photos all from your farm then?
Yeah.
So you have this big campfire with a bunch of people around it?
Yep. Yeah. So you asked earlier about festivals. Threw a party in 1976 on the summer solstice, and 40 people came, but it was an eclectic mix of people because I had lived in this little town, so I was friends with some of the local hippies, which
Not you.
they were redneck hippies.
Yeah.
We were peaceneck hippies, but there's a different kind of hippie.
Yeah.
Let's smoke some weed, drink some beer, and go get in a fight for fun.
Yeah.
And anyway, I had all the peace-loving hippies, more from the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, college-age kids that were buying land. So these gatherings were an eclectic mix of back-to-the-landers and locals. And next year we did it again. So fast forward 30 years, and there's 1,000 people camped out on my field for the summer solstice, doing all kinds of stuff. And I mean, just wild parties. Yeah. And I don't have a lick of insurance, no liability. I didn't charge anybody anything.
It was the 70s.
It was just a lot of fun. Went through the 80s and in the 90s. And then a phenomenon happened that it may not have happened to you yet. But these cute little things, those rugrats that run around, I think I saw
I got
a couple of them in there.
Yeah.
They become teenagers. And then they become friends with the local rednecks. And next thing you know, you've got a teenage redneck beer drinking party.
Yeah.
Well, all my friends are getting in their, they're the ones responsible. They're the 40, 50-year-old parents. Well, they quit coming to the party because it had turned into this, So in 2006, I just had to shift it up and started charging people $20 to come in. And I got some bands to play and hired a policeman to sit out front. And all my redneck friends were like, $20? Well, I can buy a case of beer and party in my own goddamn field. And we're like, yeah, good idea. Or last.
So you still have a summer solstice gathering every year?
Not this year, but the year following it'll be our 50th anniversary.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So not this summer, but next summer.
Yeah, we're 49 now. Yeah.
So you're going to have one this summer, though?
It's always on the weekend of the summer solstice.
Yeah, so you're almost in line with the acre schedule. Our 50th is this year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're
That's probably a little different crowd there, but
little.
We'll have to stop. Do you guys talk about farming at this at all, or is it just a big party?
No, these kids come in. I'll go in there and I'll meet them. I'm down there talking. And say, yeah, man, we were driving in. There was some kind of farmer out there, raking up hay. And I'm like, well, yeah. They don't even know it's me.
Yeah.
They don't even know they're on a farm.
Yeah.
They have no clue. They've come to a festival with all their friends, and that's all they're interested in. So, but 40 years ago, we started having, besides what I call a party, my friends call it a party with a purpose, and that would be our agricultural conferences, where there's still plenty of celebratory activities, but we do have workshops, and I bring in speakers. And
when is that this coming year?
That's always the first weekend of October.
First weekend of October. Okay. Anything else you want us to mention before we have to get you?
Yeah. It's a community farm. People come and go. I think it's a role of mine is to set up a model farm.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and then show it and write about it. And in '96, a TV show started coming out and doing a public television shows, and I have been doing 5 to 10 minute segments on the Volunteer Gardener, which is a Tennessee public television show about gardening. So I've done 100 of these TV shows, which pop up on YouTube's now as YouTube videos, but they're really well done because there's a professional camera crew.
Yeah.
And I just talk about a specific thing. But I've made the biodynamic preparation and stirred and talked a little bit about that on there. But mostly it's just, it's a show about beans or a show about potatoes, or, or maybe how to make a compost pile or stuff like that. And so I feel like it's sort of a role that I've taken on of just trying to develop a model farm and letting people see it and go there and experience it.
That's amazing. Where do people find out more information? You have a website, don't you?
Yeah, there's a website.
Barefootfarmer.com or something? I
assume that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
So all that stuff, what younger people are doing on the farm, I'm not very good at that stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the highlights of my life is I got invited to this group of crazy farmers. They call themselves Acres USA. And they invited me to speak, and that was really cool because for 50 years, that's where all my heroes have spoke.
Oh, we appreciate that. Yeah, your recording of that talk is available now. So.
Well, yeah, I was a little embarrassed. I got about a third of the way through, and my talk was over, and I didn't even get to my punchlines.
Well, I noticed that might be an issue with the biodynamic folks, because I saw that trend at the conference we went to this past weekend.
Right. Yeah.
You guys need a tight schedule. Someone needs to shuffle you off the stage.
You're not very self-disciplined, I'd say. Yeah. Well, anyway, Jen has been helping me. So the one that I'm doing in Pennsylvania, I'm hoping is an improved version.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that I get through it in time.
Yeah, we had to shuffle Jeff into a separate room, and you probably went another hour or two in there.
Yeah, and that's yeah.
We'll have to do you'll have to do a full day workshop.
Whatever you guys want. Yeah, I've done 6-hour workshops before, 3-hour workshops.
Was it supposed to be an hour?
I think acres was an hour and a half, wasn't it?
No, I'm saying, was your 6-hour workshop supposed to be an hour?
That was what they wanted, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it makes it a lot. Doesn't seem like I ever have trouble finding stuff to talk about.
No. Well, you've lived quite the life.
Yeah, and I'm sort of a rock star of organic gardening, but people don't realize I'm actually a rock star. I'm in a rock and roll band.
Yeah.
And I've played for 50 people, and they can really like that I play psychedelic rock music. I'm a rock star.
Yeah.
It just happens that I'm famous for being a gardener. Now, if you'd have told me 50 years ago that I was going to be famous for being a gardener when there wasn't a farm on the road that didn't have a garden, and it was just everybody had gardens, and there wasn't like famous gardeners.
Well, you do a good job of communicating.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
But I kind of got
and
rid
you've written all this stuff down. That's
and I've gotten rid of a lot of that stage fright by playing music.
Yeah.
So I noticed that a lot of speakers, it takes a certain personality to get up and talk in front of people.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going through that process now. I gotta get better at it.
You're going to have to get better at it in your position.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's scary.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was. First time I got up to play in front of people, my fingers didn't work. And practice, and I get up, you freeze.
Yeah, I'm gonna be in front of some people probably in the future here. So.
Yeah, well, Charles and Fred never. Did they ever give lectures? I never heard.
Charles did a lot.
He did.
Yeah.
I never heard Fred do talks.
I don't think I'm at a point where I can give any lectures.
Right.
Especially in the crowd that we bring in to do that. That's what they're there for.
Right, that's what they're there for. No, you're in a different role. You're the grand poobah. I had to pull everything together and make sure all the little moving parts fit in and work.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with a farm. Some people are good farmers, but they're not a good manager of a farm.
Right.
You start bringing in a lot of people and stuff. It takes sort of a different skill set.
Yeah. Well, it's been great chatting with you again.
Yeah.
Make sure to check out Jeff. You can just Google Jeff Poppen, and then we carry his books as well, and we'll get these other 2 self-published books that you have in stock.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Sure do appreciate that.
Absolutely.
It's good to be here with you.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.